Members, today we have the Education Constitutional Amendment informational hearings today. And as we know, we have had an all too long-standing achievement gap. And so we welcome all hands on deck, everyone who is at the table ready to dig in and see what we can do to close this achievement gap. With that, we'll open up with the Senator Jeff Howe. Welcome to the committee, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. What we're talking about is Senate File 3977.
If you could just give your name for the tape, please.
I'm Senator Jeff Howe.
Thank you.
Senate District 13, with wraps around St. Cloud and eastern Stearns County. Anything else I need to do to introduce myself?
Senator Howe, that is fine. People who follow on the tape want to get your voice tied to your name. Thank you.
So Senate File 3977 seeks to amend the education clause in our Minnesota Constitution. What the proposed amendment does is it focuses on outputs instead of what our current Constitution does, which focuses on inputs. I will acknowledge that there may be needed refinement in the proposed language, such as constitutional republic instead of using the word democracy. We are looking forward to improving and strengthening the proposed language with constructive criticism and good debate. The amendment has no intention of interfering with a parent's right to choice to either choose homeschooling or attend a private school. The intent is to ensure that all children anywhere in Minnesota can attend a public school and receive a quality education. Quality should be defined by the legislature, which it currently does, but currently our Constitution defines that as all you need is an adequate education. We will not tell local schools how to teach, but we will hold them accountable if our children do not know how to learn. There's a handout in your packets on a survey that was just conducted in the state of Minnesota. That survey shows that most Minnesotans agree that all children should have a right to a quality public education. So now why am I involved? I come from a farm family of 5 children, and our mom and dad only had an 8th grade education. So chores were the priority of the day, and neither parent could help us much with our homework. I graduated from high school probably number 44 out of a class of 46, and I didn't know how to learn. I had a high school teacher pull me in a room and tell me I would never amount to anything more than a ditch digger. I took that to heart and have never forgotten it because it happened in front of my classmates. I was headed down the wrong path in life. I had a lead foot, and one night I ran from the state troopers that ended up with 5 traffic tickets. And I had a judge that changed my life. He threw me in jail for 5 days for one of those tickets. I knew from that experience that I would never do anything to ever go back to jail again. Then I went back to court for another ticket that I received that same night. And I pled guilty after my attorney said the judge agreed to go easy on me. Well, what I learned from that is his definition of easy and my definition of easy was not the same. He sentenced me to another 30 days in the county jail. Luckily, he suspended it on 3 conditions. 1, I pay a fine. 2, I join the Navy by February 1st. And 3, I didn't drive anymore. Now, that wouldn't happen today. Now the military will not take you if you've got a criminal background. And not only that, what I did then, today, would be a felony, and I'd be looking at prison instead of going to jail. Going into the Navy was another life-changing experience. It taught me how I learned. After I got out of the Navy, I went to college, because then I knew I could learn. I knew that I could succeed. It's where I met my wife, and the rest is history. But that's why we need to ensure that all children get a quality education. We're losing too many children. We need to light that spark of imagination that is in every child and turn that into a burning desire to learn. And we don't have that today. Serving in the legislature has been the greatest learning opportunity of my life. I learned so much about things that I would normally not care about, but since it affects the people in my district, in this state, I do care and I learn about it. I'm carrying this legislation so that every child has the same opportunity that I have had, and maybe, just maybe, they can end up in this very seat instead of prison. I'll be followed by President Kashkari.
Senator Howe, President Kashkari, welcome back to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Neel Kashkari. I'm President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. I want to thank you for the opportunity for us to present our ideas in this committee. Thank all of the committee members for hearing us. I also want to thank you all for your service on education. You are all on the Education Committee because you care about the children of Minnesota, and we really appreciate your leadership and your ideas. I also want to acknowledge a few other people. Of course, I'm going to turn to Justice Paige in a few moments. Dr. Jenkins, Superintendent of the Robbinsdale School District, will be speaking with us today. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. We also have a number of families here from Minnesota Parent Union. Thank you, families, for being here. And again, thank you to the chair and the committee for hearing us. I have some slides which I will go through fairly quickly. Just on this first slide is what the proposed amendment is. We'll come back to this on what the actual language is and talk about it if it's okay with the chair. Why are we proposing a constitutional amendment? In our view, the teachers haven't failed, the children haven't failed, even the individual legislators haven't failed. It is our system, our political system, has failed our children. For decades, leaders from both parties have been focused on the achievement gap in good faith, really trying to make a difference. But if we're being honest with each other and we look at the data, we've made literally zero progress in closing these gaps. Why have we failed? Our view, politics has gotten in the way. Folks from one party have a certain set of solutions that they prefer. Folks from another party have a different set of solutions they don't agree, and we're stuck with the status quo. If you look around the country, other states are making progress. This problem is not impossible. And we can learn from the success that other states have had to show what should be possible here in Minnesota. We believe creating an individual civil right to a quality public education can drive real change and break through the political gridlock that has paralyzed us so far. Now, let me give you an example. Some legislators have said to us, well, this is our job in the legislature to craft education policy. We're nervous about an amendment such as this because maybe it would take power away from the legislature. And I would respectfully say there are examples of legislatures recognizing that there are certain issues that they struggle to tackle. The example I have on the screen is the BRAC Commission. After the Cold War, the U.S. military needed to downsize the number of bases, but members of Congress in Washington knew they couldn't make the decisions because each member of Congress had to look out for his or her own district. So they recognized that, and they created a bipartisan commission to make a series of recommendations that ultimately did make decisions by putting the country in front of politics. And so that's just an example of, it's not education, but it's an example of a legislature recognizing their own limitations and saying we need to do something bigger. And this worked. Now, let me just jump to an example that progress is possible. Some people say to us, we need to first solve poverty. We need to first solve housing. We need to first solve food insecurity. Those are all really important issues. But we also need to make sure kids are getting a quality education. And so this chart, the orange bars are Florida on the left, national ranking for fourth grade reading scores. Florida was 33rd in 2003. Minnesota was 12th. In the ensuing 15 years or so, Florida is now 6th. Minnesota is still 12th. That's remarkable progress in about 15 years. On the right are test score gaps, low-income kids versus well-to-do kids. Florida was 30th, Minnesota was 34th. In the ensuing 15 years, Florida is now 6th, and Minnesota is 35th. So we've gone down one spot, they've climbed up 24 spaces. We're not advocating just saying, do what Florida did. We're using this as an example that success is absolutely possible if we have the political will to drive change and to put children first. So let's just turn to education clauses in state constitutions. The U.S. Constitution is silent on education. All 50 state constitutions have some language, but there's wide variation. The Minnesota constitutional language was written literally in 1857 when slavery was still allowed in the United States, and just as a reminder, when women did not have the right to vote. It was intended, if we go back and read the history, it was intended to educate the children of white landowners. And that's the system that was built. And no one today believes that that's what our focus should be. None of you do. We certainly don't. But it strikes me that our education system today is mirroring the goals that were set in 1857. It is working for well-to-do children. It is not working for low-income kids, and it is not working for children of color. And I don't think that's a coincidence. If you look around the country, there have been over 300 education amendments proposed on state ballots nationwide in the last 30 years. And if you look around the country, or excuse me, look at the state map, 0 in Minnesota. So many states have gone to the effort of updating their constitutions. We are a laggard. We are an outlier in having not done this. So what we are proposing is not revolutionary. It's literally been done in most of the rest of the country. So what would our proposed amendment do? It would create an individual civil right for a quality public education for every Minnesota child. This would put power in the hands of families. That is fundamental. Instead of focusing on the system, focus on families and give families power. It literally puts children first in the eyes of the law. It raises the standard, as the senator said, from adequate to quality, and it holds the state accountable. We think that this would be a real catalyst for driving change, policy change that would put children first. And importantly, we have not specified what those policies should be. That, we believe, is done by the legislature and by the families and by the teachers at the local level to decide what their children need in order to be successful. Civil rights have led to transformation of our society over time. Think about the Bill of Rights. Think about the debates when they debated the right to free speech, the freedom of religion. There were lots of debates. The amendment abolishing slavery. Civil rights have led to transformation of our society over time. We believe this amendment can lead to transformation of education in Minnesota over time. So what do the critics say? One criticism is this will open the door to vouchers and private school. Couldn't be further from the truth. It says public 3 times in the language, in 3 sentences. And Attorney General Ellison also agrees this is not about private schools or vouchers. Some people said this will cut funding for public education. On the contrary, this would make public schools a paramount duty of the state, meaning no higher duty than ensuring quality public schools. If anything, it'll lead to more funding, not less. Some have said this can only be used by rich families who can afford lawyers. That is simply not how civil rights have worked in America. Most landmark civil rights cases in American history and in Minnesota have been brought by a low-income family whose rights are being trampled. And that one case can lead to transformation for everybody. I just think about the right to free speech. I have never needed to go to court to defend my right to free speech. And I bet you haven't either, because it's in the Constitution, and we all know we have that right, and that's what's the power of the Constitution. You don't need a lawyer to exercise your rights, but if someone tries to trample on your rights, you have that recourse. Others have said this will lead to an onslaught of frivolous litigation. Again, many other states have amended their constitutions. It has not led to an onslaught of frivolous litigation in other states. And if it leads to a case that drives positive change, that's a good thing. Brown versus Board of Education was a case that drove transformational change in our society. Some have said it'll give judges too much power. I would just respectfully remind you that the Constitution created 3 co-equal branches of government, empowering the legislature. We believe the legislature has a role to play, not the lead role, but it should have a role to play in making sure children's rights are supported. And some have said, well, this creates a positive right. This does not create a positive right. The positive right already exists today in the current Constitution. This just changes the standard from adequate to quality. The positive right, that ship has already sailed. It's in the Constitution today. So I would ask, what's the alternative? Our critics have not offered a credible plan of their own to close these terrible gaps. Some have said we just need billions of dollars and more funding. That's it. Just more money will close the gaps. The research is clear. Just increasing funding without making other changes does not lead to better outcomes. So just saying we need more money is not a credible plan to close the gaps. Others have said to us, some Republicans, I'll be candid with you, have said we just need a Republican governor and a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and then we'll pass all the reforms that we want. And I say, okay, when is that going to happen? And how many kids are going to fall through the cracks while we're waiting for a certain political alignment to happen? So I would respectfully ask the committee, when you hear people saying, well, we don't like this about our plan, okay, what's your plan? And I don't mean you, I mean to the other presenters. What's their plan that can really move the needle over the next 10 or 20 years? Justice Paige and I challenge each other. What could we do that could be transformational? This is the boldest idea we've come up with. So last thing, we're asking you to give the voters a chance. There is nothing more democratic in our society than giving the voters a chance to speak their minds. By putting this on the ballot, you will give the voters a chance to say whether or not they want all children in Minnesota to have a civil right to a quality public education. We would urge you to trust the voters and give them that chance. So thank you, Madam Chair. With that, if it's okay, I'll turn it over to Justice Paige.
Madam Chair, my name is Alan. Madam Chair, my name is Alan Paige, retired Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. Why am I here? For me, this is an issue of justice, social justice, economic justice. Education, as you know, is the great equalizer. Yet, for many of our children, it is anything but equal. And the current constitutional provision, Article 13, Section 1, has brought us to this point. There have been, over the past number of years, any number of good faith efforts on the part of people who have the interests of children at heart, with results that are going in the wrong direction. And from my vantage point, what I see is a system and a constitutional provision that focuses solely on the system and not on children. And our proposal is to put children first and to by creating a constitutional right that would allow all children to succeed. We think it would be a catalyst to interrupt the political logjam, but beyond that, it would be a catalyst to bring people together to focus on the individual child. And I think the focus on the system invariably turns to a discussion of resources. We don't talk about the delivery of those resources very often, or at least that's not the first thing that comes to mind. And we lose sight of the fact that this is all about children. One of the questions that comes up is, in our provision, has to do with what's the standard? What do we mean by a quality education? Well, the standard is a quality education which fully prepares children with the skills necessary to participate. That's the standard. Not to be confused with that piece of our proposal which talks about how we measure whether children are meeting that standard. That's something entirely different. And today we seem to focus a great deal on the measurement piece and not so much on how we get children to meet the standard. And I think one of the things that we hope would come out of this is that shift from the sole focus on the system and inputs to children and outcomes will create dramatic results. I know one of the concerns that is raised, and you'll be hearing about today, is the impact that our provision might have on homeschooling. I don't see in the language anything that changes that from what's in Article 13. As I understand the system, really that's a statutory question, not a constitutional question. And right now we have compulsory education, as I understand it. I don't know which provision of the statute it falls under, but nothing in Article 13 as it exists today or Article 13 as we propose it, the amendment as we propose it would change any of that. And then I would, there are a number of questions that get raised, and I would just point out that I happen to be one who, in my personal philosophy, but also in my judicial philosophy, you know, when you interpret language, you give words their ordinary and common meanings. And we have the concern raised about vouchers, giving the words in our proposed amendment doesn't encourage vouchers, doesn't do anything but make sure that quality public education in quality public schools, the right to it is ensured by making it a paramount duty. And I would just say, you know, I'm a child of the 1950s. I was 8 years old when Brown versus the Board of Education was decided. And I've seen the power of the law. It's what inspired me to become a lawyer. Ultimately, gave me the opportunity to serve on our court. And I would not be so concerned about the role of the judiciary in all of this. It is a separate and distinct branch of government with a role to play to ensure people's rights. But you have a role to play there too. Indeed, you have the role in the first instance.
Thank you, Justice Paige. I believe we have one more presentation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record. And as you know, speak right into the mic.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, and other members of the committee. I'm so pleased to be here today to speak on behalf of support for this proposed amendment. Before I begin, let me just tell you, I'm a 30-year educator, public school educator, and I have served in all capacities from a custodian to a teacher to an assistant principal, principal, executive director, chief academic officer, and superintendent in multiple states. And so being that I'm a public school educator, I proudly say that I will denounce anything that comes up against public education because I believe that this is the goodwill of our country. So when individuals speak about vouchers, I speak against that. Individuals bring any kind of threat to public education, I denounce it. So this particular proposal, when I look at it, why would I support it? And having been in education now for over 30 years, I look at this proposal as a vehicle for beginning the real conversation regarding those disparities that I've seen over my career over and over. No matter how many hours I continue to put in, at the end of 30 years, I'm looking now at outcomes. And the disparities, not just here in Minnesota being the second now highest, worst in the nation, but the nation as a whole, we have some real challenges. When you start looking at white middle-class children and their peers of low socioeconomic status, be it African-American, Latinx, be it students who are Asian, be it students who have ELL, American Indian, it's a problem. It's a real problem, and we have to look at it like that. And people often speak in disparities, and we say white students and their peers. Well, it's not about just white students. We have some white middle-class children. The data says now 1/3 in the nation of white middle-class students are not reading at proficient levels. For the first time, Minnesota has fallen behind the nation in terms of reading for 8th grade. We have to do something. This is why I'm proposing that we follow and support this particular amendment. So when I look at the fact and the way we fund public schools and the outcomes we receive, they're directly related to the silence of the Constitution on a federal level. And then here in our state of Minnesota, the way that we fund our institutions is fundamentally flawed. I said this 2 years ago when I came down to testify, and I still see this today. And I hear some of my colleagues, they're talking about this situation that some attorneys I've talked to. People are anxious about this amendment and the legal battles that may come up. Well, had we not had legal battles over the years, I sit here as my grandmother's mother was a slave. Okay, so you have to think about this. My mother couldn't vote till she was 25. This Constitution was put in place in 1857. At that time, none of my family members would have been able to participate in the conversation. So we're having progress just by me even being here talking to you today. So I ask you to look at this amendment and think about Brown versus the Board of Education. Had it not sufficed, we would not be here today. Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. I was born in 1965. Okay? And that opened the doors to me when I entered into elementary school, even still segregated because I'm from Alabama and we did not integrate schools until 1972. So, but it is the legal discussion we must be willing to have. It must just a discussion itself. We can prevent some of the legalities, but we cannot be afraid of that. So I say to you also, Green versus the county school district, Kent County School District, they laid out 6 conditions, student assignment, faculty assignment, staff assignment, facilities, co-curriculars, and transportation. We have not lived up to the green conditions to this day, not only in this state, but across the country. This amendment gives us an opportunity to go in and address some of these things. And I believe this, we're making decisions between what is right and what is right. Do we actually retain teachers who are highly needed, or do we make other decisions in our district? This is not right. This is a human decency issue. This isn't just a racial issue, even though race is definitely a part of it. And we can't run from that. Let's not be held hostage by that. Let's look at how we can move forward. And I think the bipartisan support is needed in a situation like this for our children. So in closing, I'm just saying that we should, as a group of human beings, be willing to just entertain the conversation for how we can do better and not live with the current outcomes that we have. It is really disheartening for me as an educator at the end of 30 years, and I can, by the way, retire today. I'm okay with that. But I feel like I have not done what I set out to do and having a transformational impact on our nation's children. You can do it. We can do it if we just start a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Senator Anderson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Superintendent Jenkins and President Kashkari and Justice Paige and Senator Howell, thank you for bringing this forward and talking about it. We simply wouldn't be here, literally wouldn't be here today talking about this issue with it not be for the report, with it not be for Justice Paige, your lifetime work in education and for the kids. This issue, Madam Chair and members, and we've got a packed audience here on a Friday morning to talk about the achievement gap. This is an issue that we should be talking about all the time. And so I just want to thank you for that, because what's been consistently said by members on this particular issue, the amendment, has been that we need a conversation on this. We need a robust conversation, and you have delivered that. The report identifies decades of terrible results, awful results for the children and students of Minnesota. And I've had the pleasure of working with Superintendent Jenkins on many issues. I know this is an issue that means a great deal to you. So I want to thank you for bringing this conversation together, because this is an issue that has brought some really strange bedfellows on both sides of the issue. I don't know if in 25 years of working in and around government and politics I've ever seen anything like this. But it goes to the depths of how people care about this, and now how we get to the root of that. I mean, you understand, as passionate as we are about public education and the importance of education, you also have a bunch of homeschool families here that are concerned, what does this mean to them, and what it means to their path forward. And again, those are important questions to identify and talk about. But you talked about, and the report talks about this, and consistently have talked about the importance of putting students and kids first, and the outcomes. So I don't know if you, in a few comments we're addressing this, but can you talk about why it's so important to focus on students first and those outcomes instead of inputs and systems?
Justice Paige.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the purpose of education is to educate children. And if that's not number one, and focusing on how we educate individual children, what's the point? Why are we here? It seems to me that the system, obviously we have to have a system to do that. That's important. Resources for that system are important. But the system isn't what it's all about. It's about children. It's about the future. Every child that gets left behind, those children who are falling behind, they're a lost employee, a lost customer, certainly a diminished customer at a minimum, and a lost and a diminished taxpayer, not to mention the burden of that loss that is placed on the rest of society. And so if we can't focus on children as well as the system in a way that gives children the best chance to reach their full potential, then I'm not sure why we're here.
I think Senator Chamberlain is next. Excuse me. I think Superintendent Jenkins might have wanted to add to that comment series. Representative Jenkins.
Yes. Thank you again,
Sorry
Madam
for
Chair,
the
for
demotion.
recognizing. That's okay. I think what the justice said, and from an educator standpoint, when we're looking at the children, and we all like to say children, but what's the reality behind that? When we set our budgets in the states and in the federal level, we see the federal government still hasn't stepped up to participate in education at their level. They're doing right now roughly about 6-7%. And then we look at the state and how we go about managing the budgets. I said fundamentally flawed. Anything I say, you feel free to ask me about it, what I mean. What I mean is that we fund everything else and then we come to education. And I don't believe just throwing money at it is going to be the answer. But I think when you're asking us to retain great teachers, great employees, there's a cost to that. And every time we don't, districts are forced to make decisions around, do we keep the high-quality teachers, or do we make other decisions? Our children are impacted by the instability of us having to make some of those source decisions. And the decisions aren't just about just having just teachers. It's about providing the appropriate environment so we can have maximum outcome. So then you have to think about the whole child. This issue around trauma is real across the nation. Our children with adverse childhood experiences, we have teachers, no matter what we pay them, if we don't train them correctly, they are not prepared to deal with some of the issues that we're seeing in the schools. It's not just teachers. Principals are not, superintendents are not, the boards in our community. That's going to be a big cost for us if we don't start funding education appropriately. It's going to cost us more in the end in terms of housing, health, and also in our judicial system.
Thank you, Senator. I keep trying to promote you. I'm sorry, Superintendent, or demote you, I should say.
I would consider that
whatever,
probably
how you want to
demotion.
look at that. Thank you, Superintendent. It's good to hear from our leaders. I think Senator Chamberlain was next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having the discussion. Madam Chair, just a first process question. Would you prefer we wait for questions or until we're done, or would you want to?
Yeah, just to reiterate our game plan, I can see we're off of it by just a bit. We had all of the testifiers who were testifying in favor of the constitutional amendment. Now is the time for members to ask questions or comments of these testifiers. They will be followed by a half hour of testimony from those who are opposed, and then we will have questions for them.
Okay,
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, gentlemen, there's certainly things I agree with, and all of us up here agree with. I do take a little bit of, I guess, I'll just leave it at that, because people around this table and in this room and beyond the walls here do take the education of our children seriously and have for a long time. Believe me, it's not easy sitting up here day after day dealing with this issue. So I would, I submit that to all of you. Every day, and then there's educators every day. We do this less than educators do, but a lot of folks on this panel are educators. We understand it's frustrating. We understand the challenges, and we don't get it right all the time. But it's been my experience, and while I'm not an attorney or an esteemed judge, it's been my experience and my research in my 10 years paying my penance up here and listening to people and visiting schools, that that this constitutional amendment will not work. It's not the answer to our problems. When we met in the office, and when I met with Mr. Turner, and who I call a friend, and others, I asked, why not do this other alternative? Because there are alternatives out there that will work. We have proposals this year that we have infused a few bucks will change the whole dynamic and the achievement gap. So there are solutions that are less dramatic than this. This is, frankly, we're taking a meat cleaver to this thing, and we're saying that this is somehow going to solve the problem. Now, you claim in your statement that this will not turn the system over to the courts, but yet in your comments you continue to reference court cases. Now, a lot of those court cases were very good, and the outcomes were incredibly positive and needed. But you cannot claim that this will not turn the system over to the courts when you claim in your arguments and you rely on court cases that have changed the system. Now, this system is still subject to suit, and we know that because we can look to the history. I was just looking at some court cases. The system can be taken to court. It is now. We know that Cruz Guzman is out there. So the point is, I agree with a lot of the stuff you say, and I think everybody up here would. But the constitutional amendment is a sledgehammer when we need some delicate operations here. This will not empower educators. It will not empower parents. It will empower the courts, and it will enrich attorneys. That is what this will do. I have a California court case that everybody should be aware of. They just sued, an organization just sued for $53 million, and the court said, yes, you've got to give this $53 million to these schools. The Constitution, in part, I was looking it up, it said that The constitutional mandate in California is for an equal education for all students. Similar language that we have here, which we all can agree with. But when you put that in the Constitution and in statute, those words mean things. Another quote, suing the state is more effective than suing individual districts. And it goes on. So my concern is that we're not going to solve a problem, but is often the case after a Supreme Court, whether it's the state or federal, more questions are raised than questions answered. Words mean things, and that's why you put it in there as such. I know you're trying to find a good solution for our situation here in this state. But members, gentlemen, audience, we share your concerns, but this will not do it. These words will mean things, attorneys will get them, and the courts will run the system. And there are easier ways to go about this. So I thank you for your time and your efforts, but I find this extremely troubling and dangerous for our state. If you look up the California case, one more quote here about how often this will do. I wouldn't be surprised if other suits in other states follow. Another researcher, they found problems in the classroom instruction, discipline, and a variety of other things of adequate intervention for struggling students. Again, the third issue, you claim that money isn't the answer. But I believe I heard in your statements, while I was looking at some stuff here, that you wanted more money. So there are a lot of complex problems here, and it cannot be solved by the courts. It cannot be solved by 6 or 9 or 7 esteemed judges and scholars sitting behind a bench. So I've taken too much time, and I'll concede everything else. But thank you for the time. Thank you for your efforts. We appreciate the discussion, but I have to be on record. I cannot see this working for our kids and solving the problems. It simply cannot. So thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Chamberlain. Senator Torres-Ray.
Can I respond, Madam Chair?
No, I'm sorry, we're in the comment period. We've had the 30 minutes of testimony, but you are welcome. Please do send us your response, and we will make sure that every member gets that. Please do. Senator Torres-Ray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, more than a comment, I would like to put a statement out that is incredibly important to me and to many of my constituents who have asked this question. The fundamental premise that we are here because we believe that we need to do better by our children and providing the resources and the infrastructure education that really respond to their needs, I think is shared by all members here. There is strong bipartisan support on that. I think where we differ is how we go about it. Where do we put resources? Where do we start? And we have not been able to do this. I've been here for 14 years, and we have differences of opinion about the process. And that brings me to the question of the language that is being proposed, because the language that is being proposed addresses a fundamental shift in here that I don't think we have had a chance to talk. So Justice Paige talks about how we need to move into a conversation about providing the resources and strong education and shifting the conversation on measurement. It's interesting because this particular amendment actually does provide or strengthens the standards. It actually mentions that language in the amendment that you propose, the language that is proposed. So there is a shift to actually put in place that language. It says in here, measure against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state, right? So that's a fundamental shift. And I want to talk about what that means in terms of resources, establishing standards and really a robust testing system that may or may not end up in the results that we are proposing. And the other part that I am concerned about is that deleting the legislature's ability to do taxation and provide the resources is problematic. That language kind of takes away our ability to provide this fundamental resource that is necessary to fund education. And so in here, it says, you know, we have that in the original language. It says by taxation of otherwise as it will secure thorough and efficient system in public schools. I don't see that language in the proposed amendment. So how do we do that? So there are two key elements that I just feel that are missing. One is the significant focus on creating these achievement standards that will ultimately end up in testing, and then shifting or taking away our ability to do taxation in order to fund it. So I would like to hear more. I know, Madam Chair, I don't know if there is an opportunity to get a response to that, but for me, those are kind of fundamental aspects of this change that I just want to hear more about.
Thank you, Senator Torres-Ray, and I'm sure there will be some response from the testifiers. I do hope you give that to us. Senator Housley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I know we're running late here, so I'll just make the comment quick. I want to thank you for coming, and I agree with Senator Anderson. This is a conversation that we do need to continue to have, and we do have to find some solutions. And this, again, brings it to the forefront so we can have these conversations. The achievement gap here in Minnesota is embarrassing, and I know we have had some solutions that we are going to continue to work on, and I think an equal right to a quality public education is a lofty goal. It is what we all want for our kids. I just don't know if putting it into the Minnesota Constitution is where it should be. I've been getting many texts in the last 3 hours from a lot of homeschool families and charter school families who are really, really nervous about this. So, and I know we don't have any time to respond, but I would like that clarified, and we can maybe have a meeting or take this offline to see where that direction would go. But thank you again. This is a great conversation that we're having today.
Senator Uyghur.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. You cut me off when you need to.
Okay, I will hold you to that. Thank you, Senator Uyghur.
No, I have the highest regard for the testifiers, and you know, Justice Paige, you're a hero and a role model, and when you're here, it has a high degree of credibility. And the way you have walked the talk and given back and inspired thousands and thousands of people, I so much appreciate that. That said, I do have questions regarding the proposed amendment, but everyone agrees children first, but we need to mobilize an interpretation that people are more comfortable with, and whether it is homeschoolers, private school sectors, union teachers, or school boards, you know, they have not coalesced, though they agree about children first. So I would say, you know, work needs to be done. You would think that all men, all women would have equal rights, but we can't get an equal rights amendment, you know, completed in this country either. So there's a number of questions. You're going to hear it on the opponents, and we need to continue it. But you know, Senator Anderson, you mentioned you know, the importance, and we all agree. That's why we're here regarding the achievement gap and the opportunity. And there are a lot of proposals that are out there, and one where you know there's a lot of bipartisan support is on the early start, and you know. it's a great start for every child, and that there's a $500 million investment. And we have that opportunity. There's bipartisan proposals, the scholarships, which you're leading, and I'm a co-author. But look at some of the remedies that are proven that will help address this achievement opportunity challenge we have. So thank you for your efforts. In good faith, I have questions about what unintended consequences there may be. More work needs to be done.
Thank you, Senator Uyghur. As you can tell, everyone here, and I believe everyone in this hearing room today, knows how important our children are. They are our future. And as I was listening to your presentation, I am reminded that we are in so much agreement. I was looking at the top of every agenda, which you all have in front of you. It encapsulates many of the things that you have said today. This is what the Senate Education Committee does. This is who we are. We focus on students, fund what works. Education is the great equalizer. In a significant sense, education is the moral, racial, and economic issue of our day. We will focus our state resources on providing opportunities for all Minnesota students to receive an education that prepares them for the jobs of tomorrow by using proven incentives and powerful innovations to achieve better results. And I think that's what I hear you saying as well. And this has been on every agenda since I became chair in 2017. This is something that is held dear by every member of this committee, and I would venture to say every member of the legislature. But there is a bit of a difference. This is aspirational, and this is what we must have aspirations. In the legislature, we have been able to follow up those aspirational goals that we all believe with real solutions, like statewide open enrollment for all public school students, education tax deductions and credits, compensatory revenue to assist low-income children. That's about a $500 million program a year. This year, we're looking at focusing some of those dollars on that all-important early reading. I can't go to bed at night when I think about the fact that 45% of our third graders are illiterate. They're not able to read at grade level. I tell you, if we address that problem with real solutions, we will change, we will lower drastically our achievement gap. 88% of those kids that are not reading well by the end of third grade drop out. It's unconscionable that we would continue to promote students who are not able to read. It is our job to make sure they can, and we're working on that diligently in this committee. You will see legislation with dollars to make sure all of our teachers can teach reading. Other things, real solutions that we have, the achievement and integration revenue. Senator Torres Ray was very involved in updating and making that program better. We have post-secondary enrollment options for high school students, which has shown, by the way, to close achievement gaps by double digits for our minority kids. We also have things like online learning, both part-time and full-time. We have charter schools that are independent and have innovative approaches. We have these preschool scholarships that Senator Uyghur talked about, those flexible, targeted scholarships that empower parents and prepare those young children, like President Kashkari spoke of, to prepare them to make sure they're entering kindergarten ready to learn. We have reading by third grade, a dyslexia specialist at the department. Thank you, Senator Chamberlain. That was one of your proposals that is now law. We have the literacy incentive aid, which is rewarding schools for literacy. And I could go on and on. QCompt, teacher tiered licensure that helps get our best teachers in the classrooms and make sure that we do not eliminate teachers of color. So we have put these things in place, P-TECH, Pathways in Technology, Early College High. And the only reason I take the time to tell you about these real solutions is because that's where they happen, at the legislature. It is the legislature that not only must approve the taxation, as Senator Torres Ray said, but must also approve the use of those taxpayer dollars. And I've just listed a few of the things that work. And so while I am behind you 100% in your effort to make sure every one of our students are prepared with an education that prepares them fully for their lives of significance and empowers them, I am concerned that a constitutional amendment does not accomplish that. That is something that we're going to need to talk about some more, because we do know that while the legislature's aspirations, which we just spoke of, lead to legislation, the aspirational outcomes, which are just the same that we're hearing from the proponents of a constitutional amendment, do not lead to those. It leads to the judicial branch. The judicial branch and lawsuits, as opposed to real legislation. We could speak more on this, and I think we will, but I wanted to give Senator Howe, as the chief author, some closing comments. Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I will say, if all those things worked, we wouldn't have the achievement gap we currently have today. And I think that's apparent. All those things may be good programs. You wouldn't have this room filled with private schools and homeschoolers if our public school system was doing its job. So we can continue to go down that road. You know, people are worried about the right to a quality public education. All children have that fundamental right. You have the right to vote, but not everyone utilizes that right to vote. This gives the power to the parents by giving them the ability to hold the schools and the legislature accountable for failing the public school system. Some have said leadership is the difference. Well, I will say this is our opportunity to lead, and I see that we're failing again. So to all these homeschoolers and private schoolers, the reason they're there is because we have failed. And we need to protect them. We need to protect their opportunity to choose and have that choice. And if that's not in our amendment, we'll put it there. But I think we're failing by choosing not to do something because what we have done has been unsuccessful. Thank you.